Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Kai Maverick Calloway was in trouble, and he knew it. The negotiation he had come all the way to the remote alien world for had gone disastrously wrong. In mere seconds, he went from a respected human diplomat to a man facing the edge of a jagged cliff. Literally, he had been captured, tied up, and held at gunpoint by the hostile alien forces. The tension in the air was thick, the enemies surrounding him shouting in a language he didn't understand. Kai's heart raced as he looked around desperately, trying to think of a way out. There was nothing. This mission was supposed to be simple, just a few talks, some handshakes, and he'd be back to Earth by evening. But things had spiraled into chaos. The alien species, the X-Tara, had accused him of trying to manipulate their treaties, a grave offense in their eyes. Now they had every intention of ending his life in the most public, painful way imaginable. Just when he thought it couldn't get worse, a powerful roar shattered the air. The ground beneath Kai shook as he braced himself, trying to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, the alien forces fell back in panic, their eyes wide with fear. Kai squinted into the distance, trying to see through the haze of dust. But what he saw made his heart skip a beat. A figure, tall and commanding, emerged from the mist. She wore a suit of shining, intricate armor, with a long flowing cape trailing behind her. Her movements were smooth and deliberate, like someone who had mastered the art of combat and could take down armies with a single motion. She didn't walk, she glided, each step filled with purpose. The X-Terra warriors, who had once been brimming with confidence, now looked like frightened children in her presence. The figure raised her weapon, a glowing curved blade that shimmered with deadly intent, and within moments she cut down the guard who had held Kai captive. His breath caught in his throat. Who was this? She stopped before him, her dark, piercing eyes locking onto his. He noticed a faint glow of intensity within them, like she was studying him, not as an enemy, but as something different. Kai didn't know whether to feel relieved or utterly terrified. This woman, this warrior, was the one thing standing between him and certain death. And yet there was something about her presence that sparked both fear and fascination. He had dealt with countless diplomats and generals, but nothing had prepared him for this level of intensity. She reached down and freed him from his bonds, the chains falling away with a swift motion of her blade. "Who are you?" Kai asked, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. The woman looked at him as though she were sizing him up, her lips barely curving into a smile. "I am Varen of the X-Terra clan," she replied, her voice as cold and commanding as her presence. "And I just saved your life, human." Kai stood there, blinking in disbelief. "You saved me," he stammered, still caught in the strange mix of relief and confusion. "Yes," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But this is not a favor. You are now in my debt, and the X-Terra clan does not forget their debts." Kai glanced around at the bodies of the fallen soldiers and the terrified faces of those who still lived. It was clear that this woman, Varen, had come from a place where power and authority were everything. There was no softness here, just raw strength. And despite everything, Kai couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward her. The way her dark hair fell in intricate braids over her shoulder, the way her posture radiated authority. It was magnetic. But he had no time to think about that now. "I don't suppose you could explain why they were trying to kill me, could you?" Kai asked, trying to regain some control over the situation. Varen's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "I would, but there is no time for explanations. We must leave. The Trekar Collective will be coming for you next." The words hung in the air, and for the first time since his arrival, Kai realized the true scale of the conflict he had stumbled into. This was no longer just a simple diplomatic mission. His life, and the lives of countless others, was now tied to Varen and the dangerous web of politics and war she was a part of. Before he could say another word, she turned, her armored form already moving swiftly toward the ship that had arrived to rescue them. "Come, human. You owe me your life. Do not waste it." Kai hesitated for a moment, his mind racing with questions. But without another word, he followed her, knowing that this unexpected savior might hold the key to his survival, and maybe, just maybe, the key to something far more complicated. Kai Maverick Calloway was still trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded. One moment, he was facing a painful death, and the next, he was standing next to Varen, the fierce ex-Terra warrior who had saved him. But as they boarded her sleek alien ship, the tension between them became undeniable. Kai had dealt with diplomats and warriors from all corners of the galaxy, but nothing prepared him for Varen, who seemed to have her own set of rules. As they sat in the quiet, sterile control room, Varen remained silent, her back straight, as she gazed out at the stars. Kai, on the other hand, fidgeted nervously. He wasn't sure if he should thank her again, or if that would make things worse. His usual charm had no effect here. Finally, he couldn't take the silence any longer. "Look, I appreciate you saving my life, Varen," he said, trying to sound casual, "but I'm not sure why they wanted me dead. I thought we were just here to negotiate a treaty, nothing more." Varen's eyes flicked toward him, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand, human," she said, her voice as cold as the stars outside. "You insulted the X-Terra clan's honor." Kai blinked, confused. "I didn't insult anyone. I was just doing my job." She gave him a sharp look. "You called our warriors walking weapons. That is an offense beyond measure." Kai's mind raced, trying to remember exactly what he had said. I didn't mean anything bad by it. I thought it was a compliment. You guys are skilled fighters. I was just acknowledging that." Varen's jaw tightened. To call a warrior nothing but a weapon is to strip them of their soul. It is to say that they are nothing more than a tool to be used. That is a dishonor. Kai frowned, trying to wrap his head around the concept. He had always viewed strength as a means of survival, not as something to be revered in a spiritual way. But he knew better than to argue with a warrior like Varen, so he decided to shift gears. "I didn't know. I honestly didn't," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not from here, and Earth doesn't exactly have the same traditions, but I do respect your strength, Varen, more than you know." For a moment, there was silence between them, and Kai thought he had said the wrong thing again. But then Varen spoke, her voice softer now, though still firm. "Perhaps you do not understand the weight of your words, but you will learn. I will make sure of it." Kai couldn't help but feel a strange mix of admiration and frustration. Here he was, a human who had survived the wildest negotiations, yet he felt out of his depth with her. He had no idea how to bridge the gap between his way of thinking and hers. Varen stood up suddenly, her movements swift and fluid. "You will train with me," she declared. "You will learn our ways if you are to survive among us." Kai's eyes widened. "Train? Like with weapons?" She nodded. "Yes, your survival depends on more than just your words. You will need to understand how we fight, how we honor our warriors. If you are to stay in my clan's good graces, you must learn the ways of the X-Terra." Kai's thoughts raced. He had never held a weapon in his life, other than a standard blaster in self-defense. But this was different. Varen didn't offer him a choice. She spoke with the authority of someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes on the battlefield. "You want me to fight?" Kai asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," she said, her tone unwavering. "But more than that, you must learn discipline. You must understand our values. Only then will you be accepted." Kai opened his mouth to protest, but something in her eyes made him stop. He could see that this wasn't a suggestion. It was a challenge, a chance to prove himself worthy. "I'll do it," Kai said after a long pause, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "I'll train, but I need your help. I can't do it alone." Varen didn't smile, but there was a brief flicker of something in her eyes, something that could have been approval, or maybe even respect. "Good," she said simply. "Your training begins tomorrow. Don't disappoint me, human." Kai watched as she turned and left the room, a weight settling on his shoulders. He had no idea what he was getting into, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary mission, and Varen was no ordinary warrior. The path ahead was uncertain, but if he was going to survive and make it back home, he would have to face not just the X-Terra clan, but the complexities of their culture and of his growing feelings for Varen. And that, Kai thought, would be the hardest challenge of all. Kai couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming training session. He had never been the type of person to throw himself into combat, and the thought of learning to fight the way Varen's people did made his stomach twist with nervous energy. But he couldn't back out now. He had made a promise, and if there was one thing he knew, it was that Varen expected him to follow through. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, trying to clear his mind. Varen entered the room, her footsteps light but purposeful. She didn't say anything at first, only regarded him with that same, steady gaze. Kai tried to smile, but it felt awkward. She didn't smile back, not that he expected her to. Still, there was something in her presence that made him feel uneasy in a way that he didn't fully understand. "You're ready to begin," she said, her voice commanding as always. "But first, we must settle the matter of your future here with the X-Terra." Kai raised an eyebrow. "You mean the whole debt thing?" She nodded. "Yes, you owe us your life, and there are consequences to that. I have been tasked with ensuring that you remain within the bounds of our honor. If you do not fulfill your obligations, there will be repercussions." Kai scratched the back of his neck nervously. "I didn't exactly ask for this debt. You know, it kind of came out of nowhere." Varen's eyes narrowed, though there was no real anger in her gaze, just the intense scrutiny that made him feel small, like she could see straight through him. "The universe does not ask for your permission, human. It merely gives you what it decides." Kai hesitated, not sure how to respond. He wasn't used to people like Varen, warriors who didn't flinch when things got difficult, who took responsibility without question. She wasn't like the diplomats he dealt with, people who could talk their way out of any problem with smooth words and clever promises. Varen wasn't interested in charm or negotiating. She wanted results. "So, what do you want from me?" Kai asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You will stay with the X-Terra for as long as necessary. You will learn our ways and prove that you are capable of standing by us. You will fight, and you will earn your place in our clan." Kai opened his mouth to protest, but she raised a hand, stopping him before he could speak. "Do not question your place here. You are not simply a guest. You are now part of the X-Terra, and you must prove that you belong." Kai didn't know what to say. He wasn't a warrior. He was a diplomat. But when he looked at Varen, when he saw the unwavering confidence in her eyes, he realized something. She wasn't giving him an option. This was a test of his worth. And if he failed, he didn't want to think about what would happen then. "Fine," he said, his voice finally steady. "I'll do it. But just so we're clear, I'm still not going to be a warrior like you." Varen didn't smile, but her gaze softened just a little, the smallest shift. "We shall see." The moment passed, and she gestured for him to follow. Kai stood up and walked alongside her down a narrow corridor, the ship's cool walls humming with energy. He was about to face a challenge unlike any he had ever known. But as they reached the training area, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this than simply learning to fight. Varen turned to him, her expression as serious as ever. "This is not just about strength, Kai. It is about understanding. If you are to stand with the X-Terra, you must understand us. You must understand why we fight." Kai nodded, though he had no idea what she meant. Before he could ask more, she handed him a staff, light, balanced, but sturdy. "Begin," she commanded, stepping back to watch him. He took the staff, unsure of how to hold it, let alone use it. Varen's eyes never left him as he fumbled with the weapon, holding it awkwardly like it was an unfamiliar object, which it was. He tried to swing it, but it felt unnatural in his hands, clumsy. The staff slipped from his grip and clattered to the floor. "You will get better, Kai. You just have to want it." Kai stared at her, confused. "Want it?" She crossed her arms, the smirk still present, but now more amused than mocking. "Yes, everything about the X-Terra is about wanting to prove yourself, wanting to honor those who came before you. If you do not want to learn, then you will fail. But if you want it, you will succeed, even if it seems impossible." Kai looked down at the staff again, his hands tightening around it. He didn't know if he could do this. He wasn't a fighter, but the weight of Varen's words stayed with him. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to be accepted by the X-Terra, maybe he had to start by wanting it too. Taking a deep breath, he raised the staff again, determined not to let her down. He wasn't going to fail. Not this time. The sunless skies of the alien planet stretched out before Kai as he gripped the staff in his hands. The training field was empty, save for Varen, who stood across from him, watching intently. The air was thick with tension, the kind that always hung around right before something difficult was about to begin. Kai could feel his palms sweating as he tried to steady his breath. This wasn't just another negotiation. This wasn't something he could talk his way out of. This was a test of his strength, and more importantly, of his resolve. "Are you ready?" Varen's voice sliced through the silence, a calmness that contrasted with the rising anxiety in Kai's chest. He looked at her, his gaze steady, even though his heart was pounding in his ears. "Ready as I'll ever be." She nodded, though her eyes remained unreadable. "Good. Now, show me what you've learned." Without another word, Varen lunged forward in a blur of motion, her body shifting like a shadow in the dim light. Kai barely had time to react before she was upon him. Her staff swung toward him with precision, and for a moment, all Kai could think about was how fast she was. The force of her strike sent him stumbling backward, the staff barely missing his head. He gritted his teeth and adjusted his grip, trying to regain his balance. Varen's movements were so smooth, it was like watching a dancer. Every strike she made was purposeful, calculated, and Kai was struggling just to keep up. "You're too slow," Varen said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "You must move faster, or you'll never survive." Kai's mind raced. He could hear her words echoing in his head. He wasn't a fighter. He was a diplomat, a negotiator, not a soldier. But he couldn't afford to fail, not when so much was at stake. He had to learn quickly. With a deep breath, Kai forced himself to focus, letting go of his doubts. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his survival, for his future with the X-Terra. He couldn't let Varen down. As she swung again, he blocked her strike with a quick movement of his staff, but the force behind it pushed him back. He wasn't fast enough, but he could feel something stirring inside him. An instinct, maybe, or the sheer desperation to succeed. Varen didn't give him a moment to rest. She pressed forward again, faster this time, her strikes coming from every direction. But Kai was starting to anticipate her movements. With a shift of his weight, he dodged one of her attacks and countered with his own. His staff connected with hers, and the sound of the clash echoed in the quiet field. Kai felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. He wasn't just defending anymore. He was fighting back. Varen's expression remained focused, but there was a flicker of approval in her eyes. She pushed him again, testing his resolve. For every move she made, Kai had to think quickly, adjusting and responding just in time. It was exhausting, but something in him kept going. The more he moved, the more he understood how to react to her. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his muscles aching, but he refused to stop. This wasn't just about the fight anymore. This was about proving to Varen, and to himself, that he could do this. She saw it too. With a sudden, calculated move, Varen swept her staff under his feet, and Kai tumbled to the ground. His heart raced as he lay there, breathless, staring up at the sky above. He hadn't won, not yet, but he wasn't finished. Varen didn't give him time to dwell on the defeat. Without a word, she helped him up, her grip firm and steady. "You're stronger than I thought," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "But strength is only half of it. You must also learn control." Kai took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm not used to this," he admitted, "but I'm not giving up. I'll get better." Varen studied him for a moment, and for the first time, there was a slight softening in her gaze. "I see that," she said quietly, "and that is why you will succeed." He wasn't sure what to say to that, so he simply nodded, his body sore, but his resolve stronger than before. "Tomorrow," Varen continued, "you will face a real test. The Trakkar Collective is coming, and you will fight beside us, whether you're ready or not." Kay's heart skipped a beat. The Trakkar Collective, the same group that had nearly killed him. "Do you think I'm ready?" he asked, looking at Varen, unsure of what he was about to face. Her expression hardened again, the warrior's determination returning. "You will be. And if you want to stay alive, you will fight. This is your final test." The gravity of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just training for nothing anymore. He was training for war. The war drums of the X-Terra echoed through the battlefield as Kai stood among them, gripping his staff tightly. The sky above was filled with dark clouds, the atmosphere thick with tension. The Trakkar Collective had arrived. Their ships hovered in the distance, their soldiers lined up in perfect formation. Kai swallowed hard. He wasn't ready. Not really. But Varen had made it clear there was no time left for training. The battle was here, and he had to fight. "Stay close to me," Varen said, her voice steady as she stood beside him. Her presence was reassuring, even as the ground trembled beneath them. Kai exhaled sharply. "Remind me again why diplomacy isn't an option." Varen glanced at him, and for the first time, a small smirk appeared on her lips. "Because the Trakkar only respect strength. If you want them to listen, you must first show them you are worth hearing." Kai sighed. Of course, alien politics. Violence first, talking second. Before Varen could respond, a loud horn sounded across the battlefield. The Trakkar warriors began to charge. The X-Terra move as one, their warriors rushing forward with practiced precision. Varen was already in motion, her blade flashing as she deflected an incoming attack. Kai, on the other hand, barely had time to react before a Trakkar soldier swung at him. His body moved on instinct. He ducked, barely avoiding the strike, and countered with his staff. The impact sent a sharp vibration up his arms, but the Trakkar barely flinched. Kai cursed under his breath. He wasn't strong enough to fight them head-on. He had to be smarter. Darting to the side, he used his speed instead of force, slipping past the warrior and delivering a sharp strike to the back of its leg. The Trakkar stumbled, giving Kai just enough time to retreat. "Not bad," Varen called out, cutting through another enemy with ease. "But you need to trust yourself more." "Easy for you to say," Kai shouted, barely dodging another attack. "You've been doing this your whole life." Varen didn't respond, but he could feel her presence watching over him. She wasn't just fighting. She was making sure he survived. The battle raged on, the air filled with the clash of weapons and the cries of warriors. Kai did his best to stay on his feet, using every trick he could think of to stay alive. He tripped one enemy, used another's momentum against them, and dodged more times than he could count. But then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of Trakkar soldiers had broken through the X-Terra lines, heading straight for Varen. She was skilled, but even she couldn't take on that many at once. Without thinking, Kai ran. Everything around him blurred as he pushed forward, ignoring the danger, ignoring his fear. He had to reach her in time. Just as one of the Trakkar raised its weapon to strike Varen from behind, Kai slammed his staff into the soldier's side. The force wasn't enough to do real damage, but it was enough to get its attention. The Trakkar turned, snarling, but Kai didn't back down. He raised his staff, standing his ground. Varen took advantage of the moment. With a swift movement, she cut through two of the attackers, forcing the rest to retreat. Kai let out a shaky breath. He was still standing. Somehow. Varen looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. Then, to his surprise, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You fought well," she said quietly. Kai blinked. "I'd what?" A small chuckle escaped her lips. "Do not look so shocked, human. You saved my life. That is not something I take lightly." For a moment, the chaos of the battlefield faded. It was just the two of them, standing side by side, breathing hard but alive. Kai smirked, trying to hide the warmth in his chest. "Guess that means you owe me now, huh?" Varen tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Perhaps." Then, just as quickly, the moment was gone. The battle was not over yet. But for the first time, Kai felt something new, something powerful. He belonged here, and he would fight for the X-Terra with everything he had. The battlefield was still thick with the sound of clashing weapons and battle cries. Kai could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he dodged another Trakkar warrior's blade. His body was sore, his arms heavy, but he refused to stop. He had already come this far. He wasn't about to fall now. Varen fought beside him, her movements sharp and precise, cutting down enemies with a warrior's grace. But even she knew they were being pushed back. The Trakkar were relentless, And despite the X-Terra's skill, they were starting to lose ground. Kai gritted his teeth. There had to be a way to turn the tide. He couldn't just keep swinging his staff and hoping for the best. He needed to think. His eyes darted across the battlefield, searching for an advantage. Then he saw it. A massive Trikar war leader standing at the center of their forces, shouting commands. The other soldiers moved in perfect coordination, following his orders without hesitation. Kai's mind raced. If he could take that leader out, maybe, just maybe, the Trikar forces would fall into chaos. He turned to Varen. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Varen parried an attack before glancing at him. I already do not like it, but speak quickly. Kai took a deep breath. That Trikar leader, he's the one keeping them organized. If we take him out, they'll lose focus. Varen's eyes flicked toward the leader, assessing. Then, to Kai's surprise, she nodded. It is risky, but you are not wrong. What do you need? Kai blinked. He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly. I need a distraction. Something big. Varen smirked. That, human, I can do. Without hesitation, she turned and barked a command in the X-Terra tongue. Instantly, several warriors shifted their focus, pressing forward with renewed aggression. The battlefield erupted into chaos, giving Kai the opening he needed. Taking a deep breath, he sprinted toward the Trikar leader. Every step felt like a lifetime. The sounds of battle blurred around him, his focus locked on his target. The leader was taller than the others, clad in dark armor, his eyes glowing with fierce intelligence. Kai had no plan beyond this moment. He just knew he had to act. As he got closer, the Trikar leader finally noticed him. A deep, guttural laugh rumbled from the alien's chest. A human? You dared challenge me. Kai skidded to a stop, gripping his staff tightly. Yeah, well, I figured I'd shake things up a little. The leader bared his teeth. Foolish. Without warning, the Trikar lunged. Kai barely had time to react. He ducked, rolling out of the way as the massive blade slashed through the air where he had just been standing. He scrambled to his feet, trying to stay light, trying to remember what Varen had taught him. The leader swung again. Kai blocked with his staff, but the force of the impact sent him staggering backward. His arms ached. He couldn't win a strength contest. Think, Kai. Use your head. His eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use. That's when he saw it. A crack in the ground behind the leader, a weak spot in the battlefield. An idea formed in his mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was his only shot. Kai tightened his grip on his staff. Come on, big guy. Try and hit me. The Trikar leader snarled, charging again. But this time, Kai was ready. He waited until the last possible second, then dove to the side. The leader's own momentum carried him forward. His foot landed on the weak ground, and with a loud crack, the earth beneath him gave way. The Trikar roared in surprise as he fell, struggling to climb out. But before he could, Kai swung his staff, slamming it into the leader's helmet with everything he had. The Trikar's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. For a moment, silence. Then the battlefield exploded into chaos. Without their leader, the Trikar forces hesitated, their movements becoming uncoordinated. The X-Terra wasted no time pressing forward, driving them back. Kai stumbled backward, panting. He had actually done it. Varen appeared beside him, her eyes scanning the battlefield before turning to him with something almost like approval. You did well, she said. Kai managed to grin, despite his exhaustion. Told you I had a plan. Varen chuckled. Yes, and for once, it did not get you killed. As the X-Terra forces pushed the Trikar back, Kai felt a strange sense of belonging. He wasn't just some outsider anymore, he was part of this. And for the first time, he truly believed he could stand beside Varen, not just as an ally, but as something more. The battlefield had fallen silent. The Trikar forces had retreated, their ranks broken after the fall of their leader. The X-Terra warriors stood victorious. Though many bore injuries from the hard-fought battle, the scent of scorched earth lingered in the air, mixing with the distant hum of damaged war machines. Kai stood among the warriors, gripping his staff with trembling hands. His body ached all over, but he was alive. More importantly, Varen was alive. He turned to her, watching as she wiped the blood from her blade, and surveyed the battlefield with a careful gaze. She was calm, composed, always the warrior, but when she met his eyes, something in her expression softened. "You did more than I expected," Varen admitted, stepping closer. Kai smirked, though he was too exhausted to put much energy into it. Was that an actual compliment? Varen exhaled sharply, almost a laugh. "Do not let it go to your head, human. You are still reckless." Kai chuckled, but then winced as pain shot through his side. He had taken more hits than he realized. Before he could react, Varen reached out, steadying him with a firm hand on his arm. "You are injured," she said, her tone quiet but serious. "Just a few bruises," Kai muttered, though he wasn't exactly convincing. Varen sighed. Without another word, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the X-Terra encampment. Kai didn't resist. He was too tired to argue, and, if he was honest, he didn't mind the attention. As they reached the heart of the camp, the remaining X-Terra warriors gathered. Their eyes fell on Kai, some filled with curiosity, others with newfound respect. He had proven himself today. One of the elder warriors, a broad-shouldered X-Terra named Jorvax, stepped forward. "You fought well, human," he said, his deep voice carrying across the camp. "Perhaps you are not as fragile as you appear." Kai let out a breathless laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." Jorvax nodded, then looked to Varen. "The council will wish to speak with you. They will want to know what comes next." Varen's expression remained unreadable, but she nodded. "I will meet with them soon." As the warriors dispersed, Varen turned back to Kai. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The firelight flickered between them, casting long shadows on the ground. Kai rubbed the back of his neck. "So, does this mean I officially have a place here?" Varen tilted her head, considering. "You have earned respect today, but to claim a true place among us, that is another matter." Kai raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like there's a catch." Varen crossed her arms. "There is always a catch." Kai sighed dramatically. "Of course there is." Varen hesitated for a moment, then took a step closer. "You are different from the warriors of my people. You fight in ways that defy logic, yet you survive. You speak when you should be silent, yet somehow you are heard. I do not understand you, human." Kai grinned, "And yet, here we are." Varen's gaze locked onto his, and for a moment, something passed between them. Something unspoken but undeniable. Kai felt his pulse quicken. He had faced warriors, monsters, and death itself today, but nothing was as terrifying, or as exhilarating, as standing this close to Varen. She finally sighed, shaking her head as if trying to make sense of him. "Rest, Kai. There will be more battles ahead." Kai smirked. "As long as you're fighting beside me, I think I'll be fine." Varen didn't respond, but the smallest ghost of a smile touched her lips before she turned and walked away. Kai watched her go, a strange warmth settling in his chest. He had come here as an outsider. But now he had something worth fighting for. The fires in the X-Terra encampment burned low, casting a warm glow over the warriors as they tended to their wounds, sharpened their blades, and prepared for whatever lay ahead. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Kai sat on a rock near the edge of the camp, staring up at the alien night sky. The stars stretched endlessly above him, so much brighter than they ever were on Earth. He still wasn't used to the sight, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to belong here. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. He didn't need to turn around to know it was Varen. Her presence was unmistakable, strong yet steady, like a force of nature. She sat down beside him, silent at first. Then she finally spoke. "You are quiet." Kai exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck, just thinking. Varen glanced at him. "That is dangerous for you." Kai laughed. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last of the warriors finished their preparations for the night. Despite the exhaustion settling deep in Kai's bones, a question burned in his mind. "What happens now?" he asked, turning to her. "I mean, after everything. Do I just go back to being the human outsider?" Varen was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No, you are no longer just an outsider." Kay's heartbeat picked up slightly. So what am I? Varen turned her gaze fully on him, her eyes unreadable but intense. That depends on you. Kai swallowed, suddenly aware of just how close they were sitting. He had faced death today, fought against impossible odds, but this was something else entirely. You confuse me, human, Varen admitted. You do not fight like us. You do not think like us. And yet, you have proven yourself again and again. Kai smirked. I like keeping you on your toes. Varen huffed, shaking her head. You are impossible. Kai leaned slightly closer, his voice softer now. But you don't want me to leave, do you? Varen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked back at the camp, at the warriors who had started to accept Kai, at the life he had somehow carved out for himself here. Finally, she sighed. No, I do not. Kai felt warmth spread through his chest. He had expected her to push him away, to remind him that he wasn't ex terra, that he didn't belong in this world. But instead, she had admitted something real, something that meant more than any title or victory. Then I guess I'm staying, he said. Varen glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. Just like that. Kai shrugged. Just like that. Varen studied him for a long moment, then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she allowed a small smile. Then you had best be ready, Kai. The battles ahead will not be easy. Kai grinned. Good. Easy is boring. Varen rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her gaze didn't fade. The stars above them shimmered, and for the first time, Kai wasn't just looking at another alien world. He was looking at his home. And no matter what came next, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't fighting alone anymore.